I never thought someone would catch me. Especially not him. That it wasn't supposed to mean anything. That's what I kept telling myself every time I closed the door. Every time I chose silence over honesty. From the outside, my life looked stable, even comfortable. I had a husband, a home, and a routine that never really changed. But inside that routine, something had been missing for a long time. It wasn't sudden. It didn't break overnight. It faded slowly, like a light dimming so gradually you don't notice until you're sitting in the dark. My husband used to notice everything about me. The way I spoke, the way I looked at him, even the smallest shifts in my mood. But over time, that attention disappeared. Work became his priority, then his excuse, and eventually his shield. Conversations turned into short replies. Eye contact turned into passing glances. Nights felt longer even when we were in the same room. I stopped trying after a while, not because I didn't care, but because it felt like I was the only one who did. Loneliness doesn't always come from being alone. Sometimes it comes from being with someone who no longer sees you. That was the part one couldn't explain to anyone, not even myself at first. I just knew something inside me was restless, searching for a version of myself I had lost somewhere along the way, so I found my own ways to cope. Nothing dramatic, nothing that felt wrong at the time. Just small private moments where I could feel like I existed again. I started spending more time by myself, doing things I hadn't done in years. Reflecting, recording my thoughts, watching myself from a distance, as if I was trying to understand who I had become. It was strange at first, but it gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time: control. That became my secret. Not something I shared, not something I explained. Just mine. I was careful. Always. Or at least I thought I was. That day started like any other. Quiet. Predictable. My husband had left early, barely saying goodbye, already distracted before he even stepped out the door. I remember standing there for a moment after he left, staring at nothing, feeling that familiar emptiness settle in again. It didn't even hurt anymore. It just felt normal. I went about my day without thinking much. Cleaning, organizing, keeping myself busy the way I always did. But there's a certain point in the day when everything slows down. When distractions run out and you're left alone with your thoughts. That's when the silence feels the loudest. I remember closing the door behind me, not expecting anything unusual, not sensing anything different. I was in my own world, completely disconnected from everything outside of it, focused, calm, lost in that moment that belonged only to me. And then it happened. A sound, subtle but enough. At first I ignored it. I told myself it was nothing, just something in the background, something I didn't need to think about. But then it came again, clearer this time. Not loud, not aggressive, just present. I froze. There's a certain kind of instinct that kicks in when you realize something isn't right. Your body reacts before your mind catches up. That's exactly what happened to me. My thoughts started racing, trying to make sense of something I hadn't even fully processed yet. I turned slowly, not wanting to believe what I might see. And that's when I saw him standing there. Not moving. Not speaking. Just watching. For a second, neither of us said anything. It felt like time had stopped completely. Like the air itself had become heavy. I couldn't breathe properly, couldn't think clearly. All I could feel was the weight of that moment pressing down on me. He wasn't supposed to be there. My husband's friend. Someone I had seen countless times, someone who had always been around, always familiar, but never like this. Never in a way that mattered. Until now. His expression didn't give much away, but his eyes did. There was surprise there, yes, but something else too. Something I couldn't immediately define. Something that made my chest tighten in a way I wasn't prepared for. I stepped back instinctively, my mind scrambling for words that wouldn't come. I wanted to explain, to say something that would undo what had just happened, but there was nothing I could say that would make it disappear. He looked at me for a moment longer, then finally spoke. "I didn't know you were here." It was such a simple sentence, but it carried so much weight. The pause, the hesitation, it said everything he wasn't saying directly. "I thought you were out," he added, almost as if he was trying to justify his presence there. I nodded, even though the gesture felt meaningless. My voice didn't feel reliable enough to use. Everything about me felt exposed, not just physically but emotionally, like he had seen more than I ever intended anyone to see. Another silence followed, thicker than the first, then he looked away. "I should go," he said, and just like that, he turned and walked out. The door closed behind him, leaving me standing there, completely still, trying to process what had just happened. My heart was racing, my thoughts were all over the place, and for a moment, I felt like I might completely lose control of everything I had carefully kept hidden. But the strangest part wasn't the fear that it was the feeling that came right after. Not relief. Not regret. Something else. Something I didn't want to admit, even to myself, because the way he looked at me, it wasn't just shock. And that's when I realized. This wasn't over. Not even close. The next time I saw him, everything felt different. It hadn't even been a full day. But the weight of what happened lingered in every corner of my mind. I kept replaying it over and over, trying to convince myself it wasn't as serious as it felt. Maybe he would forget. Maybe he didn't really see anything. Maybe I was overthinking it. But deep down, I knew none of that was true. When my husband mentioned casually that his friend would be coming over again, my chest tightened in a way I couldn't hide, so I didn't try. I just nodded and pretended it meant nothing. That had become my habit. Pretending. I told myself I would act normal. That I wouldn't let it show. That whatever awkwardness existed was only in my head. That I was wrong. The moment he walked in, I felt it. Not in anything obvious, not in words or actions, but in the space between us. Something had shifted. Something unspoken but impossible to ignore. He greeted my husband first, like always. Calm. Casual. As if nothing had happened. And for a brief second I thought maybe I had imagined the tension. Maybe he really was going to act like it meant nothing. Then his eyes met mine. And everything came rushing back. It wasn't a long look. Just a second. Maybe less. But it was enough. Enough to remind me that we both knew. Enough to make my pulse quicken in a way that made me uncomfortable. I looked away first. The rest of the evening felt stretched, like time had slowed down just to make every moment more noticeable. Conversations were happening around me, but I couldn't focus on any of them. I was too aware of him, of where he was sitting, of when he spoke, of when he didn't. At one point, my husband got up to take a call, leaving us alone without even realizing what he had done. The silence between us wasn't immediate. It built slowly, like both of us were waiting to see who would break it first. He did. "You've been avoiding me." His voice was low, controlled, but direct enough to make my stomach tighten. "I haven't," I replied quickly. Even though we both knew that wasn't true, he let out a quiet breath, not quite a laugh but close. "You don't have to pretend. Not with me." That sentence landed heavier than I expected. I crossed my arms slightly, more out of instinct than intention. "There's nothing to talk about." His eyes didn't leave mine this time. "Then why does it feel like there is?" I didn't answer. Couldn't. Because the truth was, I didn't even know what this was. I just knew it existed, and that made it dangerous. He leaned back slightly, studying me in a way that made me feel exposed all over again. "You know, I didn't expect that from you." There it was. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just honest. My throat felt dry. "You weren't supposed to see anything." "I know," he said. "But I did." Another pause. "I haven't said anything," he added, his tone shifting slightly. "And I'm not going to." I looked at him then. Really looked this time, trying to understand what he meant by that. "Why?" He shrugged, but it didn't feel casual. "Because it's not my place." That should have made me feel better. It didn't. Because there was something in the way he said it that felt unfinished. Like there was more behind it, that he wasn't saying why. My husband walked back in before I could respond, breaking whatever was forming between us. The conversation shifted instantly, back to normal, back to safe. But the tension didn't disappear. It just went quiet again, waiting. After that, things didn't go back to how they were before. They couldn't. He started noticing me more. Not in a way anyone else would catch, but I did. Small things. The way his attention lingered just a little longer than necessary. The way his tone changed when he spoke directly to me. The way he seemed to find reasons to include me in conversations that had nothing to do with me before. And I hated that I noticed. I hated that part of me didn't want to ignore it. Days passed, but the feeling didn't fade. If anything, it became more defined. Clearer. More real. Then one evening, when my husband stepped out again, it happened. Not by accident this time. "You're not as okay as you pretend to be," he said, standing closer than he needed to. I felt my breath catch slightly. "You don't know anything about me." He tilted his head just slightly. "I know enough." I should have walked away that I didn't. Then say it, I challenged, even though I wasn't sure I wanted him to. His voice softened, but his words didn't. You feel invisible. That hit harder than anything else he had said, because it was true. And for the first time in a long time, someone had seen it that I didn't respond right away. I couldn't. The silence stretched between us again. But this time it felt different. Less awkward. More heavy. You don't have to explain it, he continued. I get it more than you think. I looked at him, searching for something that would make this feel less real, less complicated. But all I found was sincerity. And that made it worse, because in that moment I realized something I wasn't ready to face. It wasn't just about what he saw that day anymore. It was about the fact that he understood me. And that was far more dangerous, because the way he was looking at me now, it wasn't curiosity anymore. It was something deeper. And I didn't know if I was strong enough to stop what was coming next. It didn't happen all at once. There wasn't a single moment where everything crossed the line. Instead, it unfolded slowly, almost carefully, like both of us were testing how far we could go without saying anything out loud. After that night in the kitchen, something shifted permanently. We didn't talk about it. Not directly, but the way we looked at each other changed. The silence between us started carrying meaning. Even when my husband was sitting right there, unaware, it felt like there was a second conversation happening underneath everything. And the most dangerous part was how natural it started to feel. He began coming over more often. Sometimes with a reason, sometimes without one. My husband didn't question it. Why would he? To him, it was just his friend dropping by like always. But for me, every visit became something I was aware of long before it happened. I started noticing the days, the timing, the small patterns. And without realizing it, I started preparing. Not in obvious ways. I didn't do anything dramatic. But I cared a little more about how I looked on the days I knew he might come. I paid attention to details I had stopped caring about a long time ago. At first, I tried to justify it. I told myself it wasn't for him. That I was just trying to feel better about myself. That there was nothing wrong with wanting to look good in my own home. But the truth was harder to ignore. That I knew exactly why I was doing it. And I knew he noticed. You look different today, he said once, his tone low enough that it didn't carry across the room. I didn't even ask what he meant this time. Do I? I replied, pretending not to understand. He didn't answer right away. Just looked at me for a moment longer than necessary, that same unreadable expression on his face. Yeah, he said finally. You do. That was it. Nothing more. But somehow it said everything. My husband was sitting just a few feet away, completely unaware of the exchange. Focused on something else as always. It was almost surreal how two completely different realities could exist in the same room. One where everything was normal, and one where nothing was. The conversations between us started becoming more frequent but always careful. Always controlled. We never said anything that could be repeated or questioned. But there were moments, small ones, the kind that linger. Like when our hands brushed accidentally, and neither of us pulled away immediately. Or when a simple question turned into something deeper because of the way it was asked. You ever get tired of it? He asked one evening. I knew what he meant without needing clarification. Of what? He gave a slight smile. Pretending everything's fine. I hesitated. That question felt dangerous. Not because of what it meant, but because of how easily I wanted to answer it honestly. Sometimes, I admitted. He nodded slowly like he already knew. I figured. There was something about the way he said it, like he understood me in a way no one else had tried to in a long time. And that's what made it harder to pull away. At home, things didn't change with my husband. If anything, the distance between us felt more obvious now. Every missed conversation, every distracted response, every moment of silence, it all stood out more. Because now I had something to compare it to. Attention, presence, being seen. And once you feel that again, it's hard to go back to pretending you don't need it. I started catching myself thinking about him when he wasn't around. Wondering when he would show up next. Replaying conversations that were technically harmless but felt like they carried something more. That's when I realized the line had already been crossed. Not physically, but emotionally. And somehow that felt just as serious. The worst part was I didn't feel guilty in the way I thought I would. I felt justified, like I had been pushed into this space by something missing in my own life. Like I wasn't the one who created the distance in my marriage, I just found something waiting on the other side of it. I knew that way of thinking was dangerous. But it made it easier to keep going, There was one night that changed everything again. My husband had invited him over like usual. Nothing out of the ordinary. The three of us sat together for a while talking about nothing important. Then my husband got a call. Work. Of course. He stepped outside to take it, saying he'd be back in a minute. But minutes passed, and suddenly it was just the two of us. Alone. The silence felt different this time. He didn't try to fill it right away. Neither did I. We just looked at each other. No distractions. No interruptions. No pretending. You know this isn't nothing, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. I felt my heartbeat pick up, but I didn't look away. I know. That was the first time either of us acknowledged it out loud. And once it was said, there was no taking it back. He stepped a little closer. Not too close, just enough to make the space between us feel smaller. You haven't stopped it, he added again, not accusing. Just stating a fact. I could have denied it. I could have created distance right then, ended everything before it went further. But I didn't. Instead, I held his gaze and said the only thing that was true. Neither have you. Something changed in his expression then. Not surprise. Not hesitation. Confirmation. Like that was all he needed to hear. The air between us felt heavier than ever. Charged. Unspoken but completely understood. For a second I thought about walking away, about ending it before it became something I couldn't undo. But the thought passed almost as quickly as it came, because the truth was, I didn't want to stop it anymore. Not when I finally felt something again. Not when I finally felt noticed. Not when I knew exactly what this was becoming. And more importantly, I knew exactly what he wanted. The difference now was, I wasn't just aware of it anymore. I was choosing not to ignore it. The air in the room changed the second he walked in. It wasn't loud or dramatic. There were no raised voices, no immediate questions. But something shifted in a way I couldn't ignore. My husband stood there for a moment longer than usual, his eyes moving between us just slightly too carefully. It was subtle, but I saw it. And once you notice something like that, you can't unsee it. You're back early, I said, forcing my voice to sound steady. Yeah, he replied, but his tone didn't match the word. His attention lingered, not fully settling anywhere, like he was trying to piece something together without saying it out loud. His friend spoke next, casual, controlled. I just stopped by for a minute. Didn't know you'd be back. Sounded believable. Normal. Exactly the kind of explanation that should have worked. And maybe it did. But something still felt off. Right, my husband said, nodding once, though his expression didn't fully relax. That's fine. Silence followed, brief but heavy. Then, just as quickly as it built, it shifted. The conversation moved on, forced but functional. They talked about random things, things that didn't matter, things that filled space without meaning anything. I stayed quiet, adding just enough to avoid suspicion, but not enough to draw attention. Eventually, he left. The door closed behind him, and for the first time since my husband walked in, I felt like I could breathe again. But the tension didn't leave with him. It stayed, lingering, watching. My husband didn't say anything right away. He moved around the house like everything was normal, like nothing had changed. But I knew him well enough to understand that silence didn't mean ignorance. It meant he was thinking. Waiting. And that was worse. That night, the distance between us felt different. Not the usual emptiness I had grown used to, but something sharper. More aware. Like he was seeing me again, but not in the way I had once wanted. In a way that questioned everything. Was he here long? He asked eventually, his voice neutral, almost too neutral that I shook my head lightly. Not really. He just stopped by. Another pause. For what? The question was simple, but it landed heavier than it should have. He said he had something to drop off, I replied, keeping my tone even. My husband nodded slowly, but he didn't look convinced. And he couldn't do that another time? I felt my chest tighten slightly. I didn't ask. That answer sat between us, incomplete. He studied me for a second longer, like he was waiting for something else, something more. When it didn't come, he looked away. But the doubt didn't disappear. It stayed in the silence that followed. Days passed, but nothing went back to normal. If anything, it got worse. He started paying attention again, but not in the way I used to want. It wasn't warmth. It wasn't care. It was observation. Quiet, constant observation. The kind that makes you second-guess every movement, every word, every expression. And the more he watched, the more I felt everything closing in. I tried to create distance where I could. Fewer conversations. shorter responses, avoiding situations that could lead to anything suspicious. But it felt too late for that. Like the damage had already been done, even if nothing had fully happened. Or maybe something had. Just not in the way anyone could prove. Then one evening it all came to a point. I need you to be honest with me. His voice cut through the room in a way that made it impossible to ignore. There was no anger in it. No shouting. Just something firm. Certain. I turned to face him, my heart already racing. About what? He held my gaze, not looking away this time. About what's going on. There it was. No confusion. No pretending. I tried to stay calm. Nothing's going on. He didn't react immediately. Just kept looking at me like he was measuring every word, every reaction. Then why does it feel like something is? He asked quietly. I didn't answer. Because I didn't know how to. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair, frustration finally breaking through the surface. I'm not stupid, he said. I can see it. The way things have been. The way you act when he's around. My chest tightened. You're overthinking it. Am I? He shot back, his voice still controlled but sharper now. Because it doesn't feel like that. Silence fell again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full of everything we hadn't said for a long time. I've been trying to ignore it, he continued, quieter now. Trying to tell myself it's nothing. But I can't keep doing that. I swallowed, my thoughts racing, searching for something, anything that would make this easier. There's nothing to ignore, I said, but even I could hear how weak it sounded. He shook his head slightly, disappointment settling into his expression. I don't believe you. That hurt more than I expected. Not because it wasn't true, but because I had reached a point where the truth wasn't simple anymore. It's not what you think, I said finally. Then what is it? He asked, and that was the moment everything stopped. Because there was no easy answer, no version of the truth that didn't change something. I looked at him, really looked this time, and realized something I hadn't fully accepted until now. We were already broken. Not because of one moment. Not because of one mistake. But because somewhere along the way we had stopped choosing each other. I don't know, I admitted quietly. That was the most honest thing I had said. And somehow it felt heavier than any confession. He stared at me for a long moment, searching my face for something that wasn't there anymore. Then he looked away, the tension in his shoulders shifting into something else. Not anger. Not even shock, just distance. I think you do, he said under his breath. Another silence followed, but this one felt final, like something had ended without either of us saying the words. In the days that came after, nothing exploded. There was no dramatic ending. No clear resolution. Just a slow unraveling of something that had already been falling apart long before either of us admitted it. His friend stopped coming around. Not because anyone told him to, but because he understood what had happened, even without it being spoken. And me. I was left with everything I had been trying to ignore. The choices I made. The lines I didn't stop myself from crossing. The silence that created space for something else to grow. I thought I was filling a void. Trying to find something I had lost. But in the end, all I did was make that emptiness impossible to ignore. And that was the part one had to live with.